What if peace was never born from love, but from terror? Thomas Hobbes believed that fear, not faith, is what keeps the world alive. Long before psychology, before politics became a science, he looked into the chaos of human nature and saw one truth no one wanted to face. We are not guided by virtue. We are driven by survival. Every law, every government, every act of trust begins with a quiet panic, the fear of losing everything. Hobbes was not a dreamer. He was a witness to war. He watched his country tear itself apart and realized that the greatest enemy of man is not hatred, but the absence of control. So he built a philosophy from the ashes of fear, a system where reason becomes the only refuge, and order the only peace left to believe in. It was not hope that created civilization. It was the terror of what happens when hope dies. In a world that still trembles between freedom and chaos, Hobbes' voice whispers through the centuries. Without fear, there is no reason. Without order, there is no life. This is not just a theory. It is the mirror of who we are, creatures born in fear, building gods out of our need to feel safe. Welcome to the Leviathan, the philosophy of fear that built the modern world. I was born in the year of fear, Thomas Hobbes. There are centuries that begin with faith, and there are centuries that begin with terror. For Thomas Hobbes, the 17th century was not a dawn, but a storm. He was born in 1588, the year the Spanish Armada appeared on the English horizon. Cannons thundered across the Channel, kingdoms shook, and an entire nation held its breath. Before Hobbes could speak, fear had already entered his lungs. And in that breath, that first cry of survival, the seed of his philosophy was planted. He would grow up in an England divided by war, religion, and rebellion. Families were torn apart. Faith turned into a weapon, and kings were executed by their own subjects. Hobbes did not write from peace. He wrote from the ruins of certainty. Out of the smoke of civil war, he began to ask the question that defines every society. How do we build safety out of fear? For Hobbes, fear was not an enemy. It was the foundation of reason. It is fear that drives men to seek laws, to form covenants, to build the great Leviathan that guards them from chaos. Where others saw fear as weakness, Hobbes saw it as the root of cooperation, the force that compels humanity to create order from disorder. In this first chapter, the year of fear is not only the story of Hobbes' birth, it is the story of the modern world's birth. Every civilization begins the same way, with trembling, uncertainty, and the desperate need for protection. It is in that trembling that reason awakens, the recognition that only by uniting under shared power can we survive the storm. For Hobbes, wisdom doesn't come from solitude or transcendence. It begins in fear, and it ends in order. Tonight, we drift back to a world before order, before the hum of cities, before the comfort of law. There was only the trembling sound of fear. It is easy to forget that peace is not our natural state. It is something we built, brick by fragile brick, against the wind. The 17th century knew this better than any age. The air was thick with uncertainty, kingdoms collapsing, faiths dividing, neighbors whispering in suspicion. Thomas Hobbes was born into that storm. England in 1588 was a country on the edge of invasion. The Spanish Armada darkening its horizon. The world shook with the noise of cannons, and for a moment, no one knew if dawn would ever come. Hobbes would later say, "I was born in the year of fear." The sentence is not poetry, it is confession. He did not mean the fear of a child hiding from thunder. He meant the deeper one, the fear that makes humanity realize it has nothing but itself to rely on. Imagine that time. Streets lit only by candlelight, each flame trembling like a heartbeat. Beyond the window, chaos moved like weather. Wars between kings, wars between faiths, wars between ideas. The very notion of truth was breaking apart. Every man believed himself righteous, and that belief turned to violence. It was a world before order. And in that darkness, Hobbes began to listen, not to angels or prophets, but to the sound that echoed inside every human heart. Survival. He would come to call that place the state of nature, a condition not of sin, but of necessity. In his words, during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war, and such a war as is of every man against every man. War, for Hobbes, was not just battles and blood. It was the silent tension between desires that could never all be satisfied at once. It was the moment before rules existed, when every shadow held a threat, and every silence hid intention. As the listener drifts through that vision, the breath naturally slows. The voice describing it becomes gentler, as though smoothing the rough edges of history. The world Hobbes saw was cruel. Yes, but it was also honest. It showed what humans truly are when stripped of illusions, beings of appetite and fear, endlessly seeking safety in a universe that promises none. Where theologians saw the hand of God, Hobbes saw motion, pure, mechanical, indifferent. To him, even thought was movement, and every movement had a cause. Life itself, he wrote, is but a motion of limbs. In that simplicity, there was comfort. If life is motion, then fear is simply the body's signal that motion may end. And to preserve motion, to keep breathing, to keep thinking, is to obey the deepest law of nature. So let the mind wander now through that primitive landscape. Picture no government, no police, no contract, no currency, only the raw negotiation of existence. Every path is a gamble, every stranger a possibility of danger. Yet in that uncertainty lies the first spark of reason. For if chaos is unbearable, then order must be imagined before it can be made. Hobbes's genius was to recognize that the imagination of order begins not in love, but in fear. The wish for peace is born from the exhaustion of conflict. The voice continues softly. Imagine a time when every shadow held a threat. That is not merely a metaphor. It is a return to our oldest memory, the instinct that kept us alive long before civilization dressed it in civility. We like to think of fear as weakness, but Hobbes understood it as the root of cooperation. Without fear, there would be no need to trust, no reason to stay, no will to build. It is fear that makes men agree to stand together, to surrender a little freedom for a promise of safety. And so, in a slow rhythm of the story, the listener begins to feel what Hobbes must have felt, that fear is not chaos, but the beginning of order. When the mind accepts this, it softens. The world before order stops being frightening and becomes strangely calm. A vast empty plain before the first city is built. A silence waiting to be filled by reason. Hobbes's England was a mirror of this idea. Civil wars erupted like storms. The old medieval world, with its divine certainties, was dissolving into modern doubt. Every institution, from the throne to the church, seemed temporary. Out of that collapse rose the need for something enduring, something that could bind men together without relying on faith alone. That need would later take form in Leviathan, the mortal god of his imagination. But in these early years, it was still only a whisper, a dream of peace born in terror. The narrator pauses, allowing quiet to settle, a breath, a heartbeat. Then, in a tone low and steady, fear was not Hobbes's curse, it was his teacher. Because fear makes us look closer. It forces the mind to ask questions that comfort never dares to ask. When we are safe, we forget to think. When we are afraid, every sound becomes meaning. In this way, fear sharpens the intellect, polishing it against the rough stone of uncertainty. Hobbes learned to trust that sharpening. He saw that to master fear, one must first understand it, not as emotion, but as motion, a cause seeking its effect. If the listener closes their eyes now, they might hear the echo of that old world, distant thunder, the faint ring of bells calling people to prayer in a city that no longer believes. The world before order is not entirely gone. It lives quietly within us. It is the moment before we decide to trust, the breath before we speak, the hesitation before we love. Hobbes invites us to see that hesitation not as weakness, but as the birthplace of reason. By the end of this first part, the storm has not passed. It has only been understood. Hobbes stands within it, watching, thinking. The narrator concludes with calm assurance. From fear came reason. From reason came order. And only in that order can peace ever rest. The music fades, leaving a sense of stillness. The listener exhales slowly, aware that the story of fear is also the story of survival, and that even in the quiet of their own room, they, too, live in the long shadow of the world before order. Night deepens, and the storm of the past still lingers in the air. We have drifted through a world before order, a place where fear shaped every breath and survival was the only truth. Yet even in that darkness, a quiet awareness began to form, somewhere between chaos and reflection. A man looked at fear not as a curse, but as a clue. That man was Thomas Hobbes. He had seen too much to believe in innocence. As England tore itself apart, he watched neighbors betray neighbors, churches burn, and kings fall to the will of the crowd. Every act of faith became an excuse for violence. Every prayer ended in another war. For Hobbes, this was not madness. It was revelation. Human beings, he realized, are capable of reason, yet ruled by passions they barely understand. In every heart, there is a conflict between desire and dread, between what we love and what we fear to lose. He wrote not to accuse, but to understand. And from that understanding came the question that would define his life. Why do we destroy what we love and fear what we are? Hobbes saw that the same fire that gives warmth can burn. The same love that builds a family can start a war. Human nature, to him, was not divided between good and evil, but caught in constant motion, pulled by need, shaped by fear. He described a mind as a restless tide, never still, never content. Felicity, he wrote, is a continual progress of the desire from one object to another. To live, then, is to chase endlessly safety, power, recognition, and to fear everything that might take it away. Gentle music fades under the narrator's voice. The tone softens, slower now, almost like breathing. Perhaps tonight, you too are asking, why do we fear ourselves? It is not a question for philosophers alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever felt the tension between who they are and who they wish to be. Hobbes's question was never abstract. He saw it in the faces of men arguing over faith, in soldiers killing for honor, in citizens crying for freedom only to beg for control. He saw that the true battle is not outside, but within. And in that discovery, his philosophy became something far more human. Not a system of laws, but a mirror of our condition. To Hobbes, fear was the shape of the soul under pressure. It was proof that we understand the cost of being alive, unlike the animals he studied. Humans know the meaning of loss before it happens. We imagine pain before it arrives. We fear not only death, but the memory of it. In Leviathan, he described this as the foresight of our own ruin. That foresight, that constant awareness of what could go wrong, is what makes us build, plan, and obey. It is what keeps the fragile structure of society from falling apart. And yet, the same awareness that protects us also divides us. We fear each other because we know what we are capable of. We know how easily trust can break, how quickly safety can vanish. Hobbes understood this paradox deeply. He saw that we both crave and resist connection, that love itself carries the shadow of loss. Every time we care for someone, we risk the pain of seeing them hurt or gone. So our greatest strength becomes our greatest vulnerability. Man is a wolf to man, he would later write, not out of contempt, but recognition. The wolf doesn't hate the other. It fears hunger. It protects its survival. And in that instinct lies both violence and cooperation. For Hobbes, morality begins where fear meets reason. When the mind learns that to protect itself, it must protect others too. The narrator's tone grows softer again, like the closing of a door in a quiet house. Fear is not the enemy of love. It is its condition. Without it, love would have no meaning, because nothing fragile would be worth holding. Now the voice pauses, as though offering the listener a moment to breathe. The room feels smaller, safer, quieter. The question still floats in the air. Why do we destroy what we love? And the answer, though simple, carries weight because we are afraid. Afraid of losing what makes us whole. Afraid of being powerless in a world that can take everything away. Hobbes turned this fear into philosophy. He refused to hide it under faith or idealism. To him, acknowledging fear was the first act of reason. It meant looking at the human condition without illusion, accepting that we seek power not for domination, but for protection. that our need to rule is the same need to survive. In Leviathan, he wrote, "The passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them." So, fear is not just an emotion, it is the architect of civilization. It teaches us to build walls, write laws, and create gods in our own image. It teaches us to submit, not because we are weak, but because we understand what chaos can do. In Hobbes' vision, fear is the beginning of wisdom. The narrator's voice grows almost tender now, deliberate in its calm. Fear made us human. Fear taught us to care. As the sound of distant wind fades behind the voice, there is a sense of reflection and inner silence where the mind rests. Hobbes' question lingers, but it no longer feels threatening. It feels like truth. To fear is not to fail, it is to be awake. In the stillness of that realization, Hobbes' philosophy becomes less about control and more about compassion. For to understand fear is to understand everyone. The stranger on the street, the friend who hides behind laughter, the leader who clings to power. Beneath every action lies the same trembling wish to be safe. The narrator closes softly. Fear does not make us less human. It reminds us how deeply human we already are. And somewhere in that whisper, the world before order begins to fade, replaced by the quiet, steady heartbeat of understanding. The storm is not over, but for the first time, Hobbes knows what question the thunder is asking. And in the still air that follows, the listener breathes slower, knowing that every answer begins exactly where all fear begins, inside the self. Silence follows the question. The world Hobbes looked upon was exhausted, drained by war, distrust, and the endless weight of human contradiction. Yet beneath the ashes of fear, something began to move. It was not faith returning, nor mercy. It was something quieter, smaller, but infinitely stronger. Reason. From the ruins of his own century, Hobbes began to ask not what men should be, but what they are. He no longer searched for divine order in the sky or moral purity in the heart. Instead, he turned his gaze to motion itself, the heartbeat, the breath, the twitch of desire, and saw in them the foundation of all understanding. In that still moment of reflection, he thought, if we are all afraid, perhaps reason can be our refuge. This was the dawn of inquiry, the first light in a century of shadow. He started to see humanity not as fallen angels, nor corrupted souls, but as intricate machines of motion and thought. To Hobbes, man was neither purely evil nor good, simply in motion, always responding, always reacting. Every impulse, every idea, every emotion was a chain of causes and effects, set in motion by the simple desire to continue existing. He wrote, "Life itself is but a motion of limbs, the beginning whereof is in some principal part within." That sentence, though simple, changed philosophy forever. For Hobbes, there was no need to look beyond the world to understand it. The universe was not a mystery to be worshipped, but a mechanism to be examined. Even the soul, he believed, was not a ghost, but a system of motion. Thoughts were movements, emotions were vibrations, and reason was the most delicate machinery of them all. The narrator's voice slows, calm, contemplative, like soft ripples across still water. In a world drowning in chaos, Hobbes did not search for God's voice. He listened instead to the quiet rhythm of cause and effect. He found comfort in its simplicity. If life was motion, then fear itself was a movement, a signal of preservation, a sign that the machine was still working. The same fear that once paralyzed him now became proof that life endured. And in that realization, Hobbes discovered a paradox both profound and peaceful, that even in terror, there is order. Every shiver has logic. Every thought follows a law. He began to construct philosophy as an engineer might build a clock, piece by piece, with precision and patience. To understand man, one must understand the mechanics of motion, the nature of cause, the logic of consequence. Nothing in nature happens without reason. Even the stars above, though silent, obey laws that never fail. The universe, Hobbes believed, is matter in motion. And if this is true, then we are part of that same grand mechanism, neither separate from nature nor superior to it. We are its continuation, its reflection, its restless, thinking particles. The discovery is humbling, yet freeing. It means that the storms inside the human heart are not divine punishments or moral failures. They are natural forces, as real and measurable as gravity. The narrator continues softly, perhaps reason was never meant to erase fear, only to give it shape, to turn chaos into comprehension. That was Hobbes's gift to the world, not peace, but clarity. He taught that understanding ourselves requires neither faith nor confession, but observation. To know why we love, we must trace the movement of desire. To know why we hate, we must follow the path of threat. He called this method scientia, knowledge built on observation and deduction, not revelation. This approach marked a turning point in human thought. For centuries, philosophers had begun their search with God and worked downward toward man. Hobbes reversed the direction. He began with the body, the smallest motions of flesh, the flicker of fear in the eye, and built upward to explain the soul, society, and state. It was a revolution not of rebellion, but of reason. He saw that to build peace, one must first understand motion. To build a society, one must understand the mind. And to understand the mind, one must first accept that every thought has a cause, and that, even in confusion, there is pattern. In the quiet of this realization, the tone of the narrative shifts again, not triumphant, but serene, like the slow spreading of dawn light across an empty field. Hobbes's discovery is not an explosion of enlightenment, but a soft awakening. It does not shout, it whispers. Reason whispers softly, not to calm you, but to keep you awake. That sentence lingers like a breath. It reminds the listener that philosophy is not meant to soothe, but to sharpen, not to promise comfort, but to invite awareness. To live rationally is to remain awake to the truth that even in our most private fears, there is order waiting to be found. The music beneath the voice grows lighter, almost imperceptible, a faint pulse, mirroring the rhythm of a steady heart. The story begins to drift into reflection. Hobbes's world was still broken, and fear had not disappeared. Yet for the first time, he could see meaning in it. He realized that knowledge is not the opposite of fear. It is born from it. Each question is a kind of trembling, each answer a brief moment of stillness. The narrator's voice drops into a whisper. we do not think to escape fear. We think because we are afraid. In that whisper lies the essence of Hobbes' awakening. Fear drives the first movement of thought. Thought seeks structure. Structure becomes law. And from law, peace is born. The cycle is not divine, but deeply human, a continuous effort to make sense of motion before it consumes us. As the scene closes, the imagery becomes gentle and luminous. The storm of the earlier chapters has faded into a silver calm. The listener can almost imagine Hobbes, older now, sitting beside a candle, watching its small flame tremble. Every flicker is a motion, a law, a sign of life. He smiles, perhaps faintly, realizing that even this fragile flame obeys the same rules as the planets above. In that moment, the world feels whole again. Mechanical, yes, but beautifully so. The narrator concludes in a tone that feels like a breath before sleep. In the beginning, there was fear, but in the dawn of inquiry, there is reason. And where reason lives, fear no longer rules, it teaches. The light dims, the music fades into silence. The listener breathes slower, eyes heavy, thoughts quiet. The story doesn't end here, it only settles, waiting for the next rise of thought. Light returns slowly, not as fire, but as rhythm. The storm of fear has passed, leaving behind a quiet pulse, a kind of stillness that hums beneath all things. In that calm, Hobbes begins to see the world differently, no longer as chaos waiting for salvation, but as motion waiting to be understood. What once seemed divine now becomes mechanical. What once seemed mystical, now perfectly natural. He had already glimpsed it in a trembling of his own heart, that every feeling, every thought, every act of will begins with motion. If we are all afraid, he had written, perhaps reason can be our refuge. But now he goes deeper. What, after all, is this thing we call reason? What are fear and love, anger and desire, if not different movements of the same mind? Hobbes saw humanity not as a collection of souls, but as a system of motion. A body powered by subtle forces, a mind animated by rhythm and reaction. In Leviathan, he wrote, the vital motions, such as the course of the blood, the pulse, the breathing, and the concoction, are not voluntary, but the voluntary motions, such as walking, speaking, moving of limbs, depend always upon a precedent thought of whither, which way, and what. To him, this was not cold, it was beautiful. Life itself was an intricate machine, precise yet fragile, turning endlessly in the vast mechanism of the universe. To understand man, one must understand motion, and to understand motion, one must listen closely, not to words, but to rhythm. The narrator's voice lowers into a soft cadence, each sentence unfolding like the slow ticking of a clock. Every fear is a motion, every love a vibration. You can almost feel it, the way thought ripples beneath emotion, how one feeling collides into another like waves meeting in the dark. Hobbes believed that what we call the soul is not separate from the body. It is the harmony of these movements. He rejected the idea of a ghost animating flesh. There is no divine spark hovering within us, only matter, alive through motion, thinking through rhythm. The imagination, he wrote, is nothing but decaying sense. A thought is simply a trace of motion, fading in the mind like a sound that continues after the bell has stopped ringing, the image lingers, not because it belongs to heaven, but because the air of memory keeps vibrating. To Hobbes, this idea was not dehumanizing, it was liberating. If thought and emotion are motions, then understanding them means mastering their patterns. Fear can be studied, love can be mapped, peace can be built not through miracles, but through order. The tone of the narration grows more contemplative, inviting the listener to drift deeper into that calm awareness. Imagine your mind as a sky, vast and clear. Thoughts rise like wind across its surface, some gentle, some violent, all transient. They are not you, they are motion. In that image, the mind no longer feels heavy. It breathes. Each thought becomes a cloud, forming, dissolving, reforming, without judgment, without permanence. For Hobbes, this was not poetry, but philosophy. The mind's movements obey the same logic as planets in orbit or waves upon the sea. Nothing happens without cause. Nothing continues without motion. It was here that Hobbes's materialism found its peace. If everything is matter in motion, then the universe is one vast, continuous chain of causes. Nothing stands apart, not even God, if he exists, but part of the great mechanism of being. In Hobbes's view, this does not diminish life's meaning. It deepens it, because it means we belong. We are not intruders in the physical world. We are expressions of it, conscious matter thinking about itself. He wrote, "The universe is corporeal. All that is real is body, and that which is not body is no part of the universe." In other words, everything that exists, stars, storms, minds, hearts, is made of the same essence. The human mind is not an exception to nature. It is its most complex motion. The narrator smiles gently through the voice, a quiet note of wonder. Perhaps, he says, we are not souls trapped in machines. Perhaps we are machines learning to dream. This realization in Hobbes's time was shocking. To suggest that thought was movement, that emotion was the physics, that the soul was a system, was to challenge centuries of faith and tradition. Yet Hobbes spoke without cruelty or rebellion. He did not wish to destroy wonder. He wanted to understand it. His belief was not that God was gone, but that God, if real, must also move. For stillness is death, and life is motion. He was, above all, a man of calm precision. To him, truth was not to be shouted from pulpits, but whispered in the quiet rhythm of logic. His faith was in consistency. If the world is motion, then peace must be the right kind of motion. Steady, harmonious, predictable. The voice now slows, guiding the listener toward that same sense of harmony. Close your eyes. Feel your breath, the rise, the fall, the pause between. This is motion too, the same law that governs stars, oceans, and thought. In this way, Hobbes's philosophy begins to sound less like theory and more like meditation. It is the calm recognition that we are both the observers and the machinery of existence. Every heartbeat is proof of continuity. Every breath is an act of balance between chaos and calm. He saw that in this mechanical world, morality and emotion could still exist, not as divine commands, but as patterns that sustain motion. Love preserves life. Hate destroys it. Hope energizes. Despair halts. The good, therefore, is whatever keeps motion alive, not mystical virtue, but physical persistence. This is the foundation of his ethics, the logic of survival. Fear teaches us to protect motion. Reason teaches us to sustain it. And together, they form the mechanism of the human condition, a dance between necessity and thought. The narrator's final words hover just above silence. Every soul is a clock, wounded by fear, guided by reason, and kept alive by motion. To understand that is to glimpse the order beneath all chaos, the order that never stops turning, even in sleep. As the music fades, the listener feels a strange calm. The body breathes, the pulse aligns, thought becomes soft rhythm. For a moment, everything moves together, quietly, perfectly, as if the universe itself were breathing through the same mechanical grace that Hobbes once saw in all things. And in that stillness, reason continues its whisper, not to calm you, but to keep you awake. Light fades, but rhythm remains. The clock of the soul keeps turning, each motion folding quietly into another. Hobbes sits in the silence, not as a mystic, but as an observer. He listens, not to divine whispers, but to the subtle movements of life itself, the pulse beneath the skin, the slow rise and fall of the chest, the quiet trembling of thought before it becomes speech. To him, these are not mysteries. They are proofs. In Leviathan, he wrote, "Life is but a motion of limbs, for what is the heart but a spring, and the nerves but so many strings, and the joints but so many wheels." That sentence, steady, simple, unadorned, holds an entire vision of existence. Man is not haunted by a ghost. He is animated by motion. There is no spirit floating above the flesh. The body is the spirit, made visible. Every thought is written in heartbeat, every emotion translated into breath. The body is the mind's first philosophy. The voice of the narrator slows, calm and grounded. There is no ghost in the machine, only movement. It is a radical thought, yet strangely comforting. For Hobbes, this was not a denial of mystery. It was a way of bringing it home. He believed that to understand the divine, one must first understand the body. To know order, one must first listen to the pulse. If God exists, he speaks not through thunder, but through motion, through the quiet continuation of life that refuses to stop. Hobbes found in the body a mirror more honest than any doctrine. The body never lies. It trembles when afraid, warms when loved, grows still when content. In these motions, we glimpse the laws of nature, not as commands, but as harmony. Each beat of the heart is obedience to physics, yet also an act of grace. The narrator's tone becomes softer, almost meditative. As your chest rises and falls, know that this too is philosophy in motion. You breathe, you listen, you move because the universe moves. And in that recognition, fear loses some of its edge. Hobbes did not believe the soul was separate from the body because he could see, with the clarity of a scientist, how the two were entwined. Desire is not an abstract feeling, it is warmth in the blood. Thought is not a voice in the void. It is the vibration of the brain, the chemistry of connection. He called these vital motions, the unconscious currents that sustain life before the mind can even think about them. To him, the body was not fragile dust destined for decay. It was a miracle of self-perpetuating order. In his words, "For seeing life is but motion, the beginning of motion is in some principal part within. Why may we not say that all automata have an artificial life?" He saw man as both natural and artificial, a living mechanism, part creature, part creation. And if the body is the mechanism, then consciousness is its reflection. The mind is not above the body, it is the echo of its movements, the mirror of its rhythm. Look at your hands, the narrator says softly. They move because of thought, and yet thought itself moves because of them. You are not two things. You are one continuous motion, one living pattern in an endless sea of patterns. In this understanding, the listener feels a quiet relief, the kind that comes from no longer needing to divide what has always been whole. There is no war between flesh and spirit, no shame in being material. For Hobbes, to be material was to be part of the universe itself, made of the same matter that moves the stars. He believed that peace, true peace, begins not in heaven, but in the harmony between mind and body. When we breathe without resistance, we mirror the order that the entire cosmos obeys. Every exhale is a small surrender to the natural law that binds all things. The narrator continues. To live well is not to escape the body, but to understand it, not to silence its tremors, but to listen, because every motion has meaning. There is something profoundly human in that. Hobbes, often seen as cold and mechanical, was in truth deeply compassionate in his precision. He wanted to protect humanity not by faith or fantasy, but by understanding. If we are machines, then we can be repaired. If we are systems, then we can find balance. He saw in the breath a metaphor for the state itself. Inhale and exhale, power and rest, force and peace. The state, like the body, survives only through rhythm. Too much force, and it collapses. Too little, and it dies. The same applies to the mind. The art of being human, Hobbes suggests, is to maintain motion without losing equilibrium. At this point, the narrator's tone shifts slightly, still soft, but now luminous, as though the light of understanding had begun to spread across the darkness. There is a grace in movement, not divine, but natural. The heart does not need a reason to beat. It simply obeys the law of life. And this, Hobbes would say, is all the meaning we need. We do not need immortal souls to be sacred. The law of motion itself, continuous, ordered, unstoppable, is enough to make life extraordinary. As you listen, your own breath becomes part of the philosophy. Inhale, and you feel the law of preservation. Exhale, and you feel the surrender of peace. You are living proof of Hobbes's vision that existence itself is the first covenant, the body, the first sovereign, motion, the first law. He understood something that later thinkers would call profound, that self-awareness begins in the body. To feel is to know. To breathe is to understand that you belong to something vast, mechanical, and yet inexplicably beautiful. The music beneath the narration slows, fading into the rhythm of a steady heartbeat. The world feels still again, not because it has stopped, but because every motion has found its place. The narrator closes in a tone that feels like a quiet closing of a book. Hobbes did not seek to spiritualize the body. He sought to humanize the spirit. He saw that in every muscle and motion, the universe reflects itself endlessly, elegantly, without need for ghosts. A pause, a breath, and in this understanding, the voice whispers, we find rest. The scene fades, not into silence, but into rhythm. The slow, measured sound of breathing becomes the final reminder. The law of motion is still alive. And as the listener drifts towards sleep, they carry with them the same gentle truth Hobbes once found in the body itself. That there is peace not in stillness, but in motion understood. Stillness does not mean the end of motion. It means the moment before understanding begins. Hobbes had already traced life to movement, the body to rhythm, and the mind to the quiet hum of matter in motion. Yet one question remained. If everything moves according to cause and effect, can thought itself be mapped, measured, predicted, understood? He began to look at the world not as chaos, but as design. The way the planets turn, the way the tides rise, the way a breath begins and ends, all of it followed rules. Exact and constant. If these rules govern the heavens, he wondered, could they not also govern the mind? And so he began to see thought as geometry, not in the sense of cold calculation, but as harmony, a kind of order beneath the noise. He believed that reasoning, like architecture, could be built upon clear foundations. Every idea, every conclusion must have its line, its point, its proof. In Leviathan, he wrote, "Science is the knowledge of consequences and dependence of one fact upon another." That single line, the knowledge of consequences, became the cornerstone of his entire philosophy. To think, Hobbes believed, was to follow a line from cause to effect, from motion to motion, until the mind discovered its own structure. The narrator's voice slows, soft and steady, like chalk tracing a circle on stone. If we can measure the stars, perhaps we can measure ourselves. It was not arrogance, it was humility. The realization that the same order that shapes the universe also lives within us. For Hobbes, the laws of nature were not distant or divine. They were immanent, breathing through every atom, every heartbeat, every thought. He did not seek to turn man into a machine without wonder. He sought to show that wonder itself has logic. Awe, he believed, is the mind recognizing its place within a larger geometry, the way light curves through glass, or the way sound echoes through air. To feel awe is to momentarily see the equation behind existence and to realize that you are part of it. Hobbes approached philosophy the way a mathematician approaches a proof. He began with what he could see: motion, matter, fear, desire. From these, he derived conclusions about peace, law, and society. His reasoning was not abstract, but architectural. Each thought had to rest on another, like stones in a cathedral. If one fell, the whole structure would tremble. The narrator continues gently, the tone both instructive and intimate. To Hobbes, clarity was not coldness, it was mercy. Because confusion breeds fear, but reason is the geometry of calm. He saw that most of human misery comes not from cruelty, but from misunderstanding, from men mistaking shadows for truth. To think clearly, then, was not a privilege, but a duty. It was how humanity could finally stop tearing itself apart. And yet, there is poetry even in this logic. The same mind that calculates also dreams. The same geometry that measures also marvels. Hobbes did not separate the two. He united them. The universe, he believed, is both precise and profound. A place where beauty is not chaos, but perfect proportion. He wrote, "Words are wise men's counters, but they are the money of fools." In that single sentence, he warned that language, if not measured, can deceive. To think geometrically means to weigh words as one weighs numbers, carefully, patiently, knowing that clarity is a form of compassion. The narrator breathes softly. Imagine your thoughts as lines of light. Each one connects to another, forming shapes in the dark, triangles of reason, circles of understanding. Together, they draw the outline of who you are. In this vision, the human mind becomes a universe of its own, vast, structured, self-consistent. Each fear becomes a point on a map, each hope a trajectory. The soul is not chaos, but a pattern of forces waiting to be understood. This realization brings a strange comfort. It means that pain has reason, that confusion has form, that even suffering moves along predictable lines. Nothing in life is wasted. Every experience leaves a mark in the grand geometry of being. The narrator's tone grows warmer, almost reverent. Hobbes saw that to understand the universe is to understand ourselves. The same laws that move the stars also move our hearts. The universe breathes through laws. You are one of them. There is a long pause, not silence, but space. The kind of space where thought unfolds naturally, like the slow expansion of light across a sleeping room. This is the point where philosophy meets peace. Hobbes's geometry was not about controlling the world, but aligning with it. To live well, he believed, is to live according to the structure of reality, to follow its curves, not resist them. Just as a planet finds balance in orbit, so does the mind find balance in understanding. In his time, this view was revolutionary. To say that thought could be measured was to challenge the mystery of faith. But Hobbes did not destroy the sacred. He redefined it. He made reason itself holy, the steady, lawful beauty of the world as it is. The narrator softens his voice again, almost to a whisper. You are not outside the law. You are its continuation. Every breath, every heartbeat, every thought you have tonight follows the same order that turns galaxies. And suddenly, the idea of control dissolves. There is no need to master the world, because you already move with it. The geometry of thought is not a prison. It is a map, one that leads you back to belonging. The music beneath the words grows faint, like distant starlight reflected on water. The story slows, leaving the listener in a state of quiet revelation. Perhaps the comfort Hobbes offers is not in answers, but in structure, in knowing that even our uncertainties trace patterns too vast to see. Perhaps reason is not the absence of mystery, but its most faithful shape. The final lines come with the gentleness of dusk settling over the mind. Every law that governs the stars governs you. Every pattern that moves the ocean moves your thoughts. There is no chaos here, only a geometry too beautiful to grasp. And with that, the voice falls silent, not as an ending, but as an opening. The listener breathes, the universe breathes, and for one quiet moment, they are the same motion. Light fades again, not into darkness, but into tension. The quiet harmony of thought, that delicate geometry of reason, begins to tremble. Hobbes had traced order through motion and peace through understanding. Yet beneath all structure still lies something ancient, something wild and unresolved. For before men built laws, they built fear. Before there was government, there was survival. And before peace, there was the state of nature. The narrator's voice slows, calm but heavy, like the hush before a storm. Imagine a night where every sound is a warning, every silence is a trap. This is not metaphor. It is the world as Hobbes saw it, stripped bare of law, religion, and restraint. A world where each person lives in constant uncertainty, measuring every shadow for threat. In such a world, reason is not yet a guide, but a weapon, used to outthink, outmaneuver, outlive. Hobbes called this the state of nature, not a place in time, but a condition of being, a state in which there is no authority to keep men in awe, no common power to hold them to their word. Every man becomes both predator and prey. In such condition, he wrote, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The narrator pauses, letting the words echo. Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Each syllable lands like a heartbeat in the dark. It is not hatred that creates this world, but equality, the equality of vulnerability. In the state of nature, Hobbes said, all men are equal, not in strength or wisdom, but in their ability to harm and be harmed. Every person can kill, and every person can be killed. This equality of power becomes the root of fear. For what you can do to another, they can do to you. The voice of the narrator steadies, measured like breath. This is not cruelty, it is the mirror of survival. The universe moves by law, but men without law move by need. In this place, trust is fragile, promises have no weight, for there is no one to enforce them. Hope is dangerous, mercy suicidal, even kindness becomes a gamble. The listener can almost feel it, that tightening in the chest, the animal alertness that comes with danger. Hobbes does not exaggerate. He simply describes the human heart when stripped of comfort. He knew this fear intimately. He had seen civil war turn families against each other, seen the collapse of kings and the flood of vengeance that followed. To him, this was not history. It was human nature revealed. Civilization was not built upon virtue. It was built to escape terror. The narrator breathes out slowly. In this silence, life itself becomes a negotiation with death. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the cry of an infant, might bring ruin. Every silence could mean safety or doom. Sleep becomes a luxury, trust an impossibility. In the state of nature, even love is shadowed by fear. For to love something is to risk its loss. Hobbes saw that fear in every heart, not only fear of pain, but fear of betrayal, humiliation, or death. It was this universal anxiety that shaped his entire philosophy. Fear, he realized, is not merely an emotion, it is the law beneath all others. It is the force that drives men to seek safety, to make agreements, to surrender freedom in exchange for peace. He wrote, "Covenants without the sword are but words. Without power, promises mean nothing. Without law, morality collapses. In the state of nature, even goodness must bow to necessity." The narrator's voice grows quieter, steady and low, like someone speaking in a candlelit room. perhaps this is what Hobbes understood better than anyone, that peace is not our natural condition, it is our invention. That sentence feels heavy, but strangely clarifying. It is not a condemnation of humanity, but an awakening. Hobbes forces us to look at what lies beneath our cities, our laws, our civility, the raw need to survive. And once we see it, we begin to understand why we built the world the way we did. He believed that this realization was the first act of wisdom, not to deny fear, but to face it without illusion. Fear is not weakness, it is information. It tells us where the boundaries of survival lie. It tells us what must change for peace to exist. The narrator continues, voice soft as night rain. To live without law is to live without tomorrow. Every sunrise becomes a question, not a promise. It is easy to mistake Hobbes's vision for pessimism, but listen more closely, and there is compassion there, a kind of realism born from empathy. He did not hate mankind, he pitied it. He saw that every act of cruelty was a desperate attempt at control, that every lie began in fear, that even the hunger for power was a longing for safety. This is the paradox of the state of nature, that even in its brutality, there is a strange equality. All men are alike in their terror, all fragile before fate. No one is immune to fear, not even the strongest. The narrator pauses again, as if inviting the listener to breathe, to feel their own pulse echoing in time with Hobbes's vision. Perhaps, if you listen closely, you can hear that ancient heartbeat, the one that quickens at danger, that holds its breath at silence. It is the same pulse that has guided humanity since its first night on Earth. The image expands in the listener's mind, a landscape without cities, only darkness and wind, where the firelight flickers across faces both hopeful and haunted. And within each, the same thought. Who can I trust? This question, simple and terrible, is the beginning of civilization. For out of fear comes the search for order, out of chaos, the longing for peace. Hobbes did not romanticize this, he accepted it as fact. In the state of nature, peace is impossible because there is no common power to make it real. Men may desire peace, but without structure, that desire dies in the noise of survival. And so, Hobbes began to dream of something new, a structure strong enough to bind the will of all, a covenant powerful enough to end the war of every man against every man. That dream would become the heart of his masterpiece, the Leviathan. But for now, the story remains in darkness, the air thick with tension. The pulse of survival still strong. The narrator's voice softens to a whisper. Before there was peace, there was fear. Before there was law, there was the state of nature. And in that state, we learned what it truly means to be human, fragile, restless, and always reaching for safety. A breath, a pause. Remember this, the voice says gently. Every law we live by today was written first in fear. The music fades, leaving only the echo of heartbeat and the slow rhythm of breathing, the sound of life persisting in the dark. Night has not lifted, but the fear inside it has begun to breathe slower. The world Hobbes described, that raw, sleepless landscape where every man stands alone, cannot last forever. Even in darkness, something begins to stir beneath the noise of conflict, the faint, rhythmic pulse of reason. Fear had taught humanity to fight, to defend, to survive. But fear alone cannot sustain life. In time, it collapses under its own exhaustion. There comes a moment, not grand, not loud, when the endless motion of violence begins to falter and the mind whispers something new. The narrator's voice lowers, soft but clear, like a calm wind through a shattered field. Fear taught us to fight. Reason taught us to stop. This was the turning point in Hobbes's vision, the awakening of understanding. From chaos rises reflection. From terror, the awareness that survival cannot depend on conflict alone. For the first time, man begins to see that the same logic that drives him to fight could also guide him to peace. Hobbes called this shift the discovery of the laws of nature. Not mystical commandments from above, but truths drawn from the logic of survival itself. He wrote, "The laws of nature are precepts or general rules found out by reason, by which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive of his life, or taketh away the means of preserving the same." In simple words, reason teaches us what fear cannot, that safety is not won by dominance, but by restraint. The narrator pauses, then continues in a tone that feels almost like meditation. Peace does not begin with victory. It begins with understanding that war, if unending, destroys even the victor. This realization does not arrive through morality or faith. It arrives through exhaustion, through the recognition that every battle eventually consumes its cause. In Hobbes's world, reason is not a divine spark, but the mind's natural defense against chaos. It appears when fear reaches its limit. The first whisper of peace is quiet. It does not shout or demand. It begins in the small, trembling awareness that we can no longer bear to live in constant threat. It is the thought that says, if I desire peace for myself, I must allow it for you as well. That single thought becomes the seed of civilization. Hobbes believed that reason, when left to its full strength, reveals a pattern of laws of nature, that guide men away from destruction. The first and greatest of these laws is simple: seek peace and follow it. The second follows naturally. By all means we can defend ourselves. These two laws exist in balance: peace as purpose, defense as necessity. Together, they form the heartbeat of human society. The narrator's voice softens further, steady as a breath. Peace begins not in power, but in choice. It is the quiet decision to stop chasing control and start building trust. Hobbes's insight was profound because it made peace practical. He didn't dream of perfect harmony or eternal love. He saw peace as an agreement, an arrangement of reason between fearful minds. To live peacefully is to live intelligently, to understand that cooperation, though fragile, is safer than chaos. This does not mean peace is free of fear. In Hobbes's philosophy, peace is fear transformed, fear that has learned to speak, to negotiate, to build. Fear remains the origin, but reason becomes its guide. Together, they create a fragile equilibrium, not paradise, but safety. The narrator breathes gently, then says, perhaps tonight you can feel it too. That stillness that comes not from absence of fear, but from acceptance. Peace begins when you stop asking the world to stay. The line lingers like a sigh. It does not mean surrender. It means trust. It means realizing that control is an illusion, that the world moves whether we resist or not. Peace in Hobbes' sense, is the act of aligning with motion rather than fighting it, of building order within the flow of existence. He understood that fear could make men cunning, but only reason could make them wise. Reason is the mirror that allows man to see himself not as the center of the world, but as one motion among countless others. From that humility, the first peace is born. Hobbes wrote, "Reason suggesteth convenient articles of peace, upon which men may be drawn to agreement." He believed that these articles, these unspoken contracts, arise not from faith in goodness, but from understanding the cost of chaos. In this sense, reason becomes an act of compassion, a recognition that others too are afraid and that their safety is bound to yours. The narrator's voice carries warmth now, the tone of reassurance. To seek peace is not to deny fear, but to honor it, to say, "I too am fragile. I too wish to live." From that recognition, humanity begins to move together, no longer as enemies, but as cautious allies. The fires of war dim, not because hatred is gone, but because the exhaustion of survival gives way to the desire for continuity. Peace, Hobbes teaches, is not a miracle. It is maintenance. It must be built, protected, and repaired over and over. Yet in that constant rebuilding lies the meaning of civilization itself. The narrator leans closer, as if speaking directly to the listener's heart. Peace is not the absence of noise. It is the decision to listen beneath it, to the quiet rhythm that has always been there, waiting. And so, the story drifts toward calm. The state of nature, the restless fear of the previous chapter, begins to fade into a gentler awareness. The sky clears. The pulse slows. The war is not yet over, but the human mind has changed. It has learned that survival without peace is just another kind of death. Hobbes saw in this transition the first moral law written by nature herself, the instinct to preserve life through cooperation. Every civilization that followed would simply build upon this truth. That reason, once awakened, is not a rebellion against fear, but its transformation. The narrator concludes softly, his voice fading like dusk. Fear made us fight. Reason made us listen. And in that listening, the first whisper of peace began. A pause, then a breath. Outside, the universe continues its motion, quiet, endless, precise. The listener can feel it, a stillness spreading through thought, like ripples across a lake. Hobbes' truth settles gently in the air. Peace is not beyond us. It is already here, waiting to be chosen. Peace has been spoken into existence, softly, like a prayer half believed. Humanity, weary from the long storm of fear, begins to understand what Hobbes had seen so clearly, that peace is not a miracle, but a method. It is the most rational thing in the world. Yet in this fragile calm, another truth lingers. Knowledge alone does not save us. The narrator's voice lowers, slow and thoughtful, like candlelight flickering in an empty hall. Reason has shown us the path to peace, he says, but there is no one yet to make us walk it. This is the tragedy and the beauty of Hobbes' vision. We can understand the logic of peace. We can even desire it. But desire alone cannot bind the will. In the state of nature, reason whispers its promises into ears still tuned to the sound of danger. And so men though capable of understanding harmony, remain prisoners of fear. He wrote, "Covenants without the sword are but words. Without power to enforce them, agreements dissolve like mist in the morning. Trust collapses under suspicion. The dream of safety fades, like a dream of safety that fades when you wake. The music beneath the words grows soft, almost like breathing. The tone is no longer anxious but reflective, gentle, accepting, as if Hobbes himself is speaking to us through time. He does not condemn humanity for this weakness. He only describes it with a clarity so honest it feels compassionate. Men are not wicked by choice. They are frightened by nature. They know what must be done, but lack the courage to do it together." The narrator continues, "Reason is our promise to ourselves. But a promise, alone in the dark, is fragile. In Hobbes's world, peace is rational, but it is not yet real. The laws of nature tell men to seek safety, but nothing compels them to obey. They're caught between two instincts, the pull of reason and the grip of fear. Each man wants peace, yet each fears being the first to trust. That tension becomes the heartbeat of his philosophy. It is the recognition that understanding is not enough, that wisdom must be made flesh through power. Hobbes saw this gap between thought and action, between reason and will, as the final obstacle to peace. Until something greater unites men, the world remains in its restless balance, aware, but still unsafe." He wrote, "For the laws of nature, as justice, equity, modesty, mercy, and in some, doing to others as we would be done to of themselves, without the terror of some power to cause them to be observed, are contrary to our natural passions." The narrator's tone softens, filled with empathy. Even when we know what is right, we tremble before it. We fear the betrayal of trust more than the cost of war. This is not cynicism. It is understanding. Hobbes recognized that reason is the seed, but fear is still the soil. Peace must grow from both. Without enforcement, rationality becomes a dream. Without trust, society remains a thought experiment. And yet, this recognition carries a quiet hope, because to see the flaw in reason is already to imagine its repair. The mind that identifies its limits has already begun to transcend them. Hobbes knew that the next step, the true birth of peace, would require something beyond philosophy, an agreement powerful enough to bind all men under one will. The narrator's voice becomes slower now, like waves drawing back from the shore. "In this pause," he says, "humanity stands between two worlds, the world of fear that it remembers, and the world of order that it has not yet built. Reason hovers there, fragile but luminous. It promises peace but cannot yet give it. The people see its truth but lack its authority. The laws of nature whisper their logic. Be just, be fair, be kind, but without power. These are only echoes in the wind." Hobbes's insight is both chilling and profoundly human. To know peace is possible, and yet to fail to achieve it, is the fate of man without unity. We can imagine paradise but cannot hold it in our hands. He saw it clearly, that fear could teach men survival, and reason could teach them peace. But neither could guarantee obedience. Something else must emerge, something that binds them both. That something would soon take shape in his greatest idea, the Leviathan, the artificial soul of order, born not of faith, but of necessity. The narrator's tone grows quieter, almost reverent, like the hush before dawn. Reason whispers peace, but there is no one yet to make us obey it. The words linger, suspended in silence. The listener can feel their truth, the ache of knowing what could be, and the sadness of not yet reaching it. This is the stillness before creation, the pause between chaos and structure. The mind rests, but the heart waits. Fear no longer rules, yet reason is not yet sovereign. Humanity stands in this twilight of understanding, listening to its own heartbeat, as though waiting for a new one to begin. The narrator breathes softly. Perhaps this is the gentlest form of awakening, to realize that peace begins in the mind, but must be built in the world. And with that, the light begins to shift. The sound of wind fades. The tone grows warmer, expectant. Something vast and unseen is forming, the idea of a power strong enough to hold the human race together, to turn reason into law and law into peace. The voice falls almost to a whisper, as though preparing for the next dawn. Soon, they will dream of a greater body, a power above themselves, not a god of heaven, but a god of their own design. This quiet foreshadowing opens the bridge to the next chapter, to the moment when men, out of fear and reason combined, create the Leviathan, the great artificial soul of order. The music fades into stillness. The final breath carries Hobbes's message, calm, inevitable, and eternal. Reason is the light that shows the way. Power is the hand that builds the road. And as the last note disappears into silence, the listener feels the weight of transition. Peace glimpsed, not yet grasped, hope alive, waiting to take form. Silence lingers at the edge of understanding. Reason has spoken, but the world remains waiting, suspended between fear and faith, between knowing what must be done and lacking the power to do it. Humanity stands in this quiet threshold, aware of peace, yet unable to hold it. The night is calm now, but it is not secure. Something is still missing. Something greater must rise. The narrator's voice softens, inviting the listener to close their eyes. Close your eyes. Imagine a power strong enough to keep you safe. The sound fades into stillness. Only a faint hum remains, like the pulse of something vast awakening in the dark. This is where Hobbes's next idea begins, not in politics, but in imagination. Before men could build the Leviathan, they had to dream of it. It began as a vision, a longing born from fear and shaped by reason. Humanity, tired of chaos, began to imagine a single power that could protect everyone from everyone else. We dream of kings not to rule us, the voice continues, but to protect us from ourselves. It is a haunting truth. Hobbes saw that the greatest danger to man is not nature, nor beasts, nor gods, but man himself. Our intelligence, our ambition, our hunger for survival. These same gifts that make us powerful also make us dangerous. Left without limits, they devour everything. And so, to preserve life, we create something larger than ourselves. An idea strong enough to restrain the very hands that built it. Hobbes called this creation the Leviathan, not a monster, but a metaphor, a collective body made from the will of all, an artificial soul formed from fear and reason combined. In his words, the multitude so united in one person is called a commonwealth. In Latin, civitas. This is the generation of that great Leviathan, which is but an artificial man. The narrator's tone grows more meditative, drifting like a tide. Imagine that you are part of something greater, a vast body, breathing through 1,000 hearts, thinking through one mind. The image unfolds gently, not violent or grand, but slow and luminous. Each individual, once alone in fear, now becomes the cell in the body of order. Together they create the very thing they once feared, power. Yet in this unity, that power becomes something sacred, almost divine. Hobbes did not imagine this as tyranny. He saw it as protection, the rational response to chaos. To him, the sovereign was not a god to worship, but a wall to shelter behind. Without it, humanity would fall back into the state of nature, that sleepless world of suspicion and war. The narrator speaks softly, his words like ripples in still water. To create peace, we must surrender a part of our freedom, not because we are weak, but because we are wise. This surrender is not humiliation. It is design. It is the mind's acknowledgement that absolute liberty leads not to happiness, but to fear. Hobbes believed that freedom, without structure, becomes its opposite, a return to chaos. So men give up a portion of their rights in exchange for safety, creating the first true covenant of civilization. He wrote, "The only way to erect such a common power as may be able to defend them from the invasion of foreigners and the injuries of one another is to confer all their power and strength upon one man, or one assembly of men, that may reduce all their wills by plurality of voices unto one will." The narrator breathes out slowly. It sounds simple, but it is the most complex act of the human spirit, to trust another with the power to protect you from yourself. In this moment, the listener feels the paradox at the center of Hobbes' thought, that true control begins with surrender. The fear that once divided men now binds them. The chaos that once tore them apart now gives birth to unity. The desire to survive becomes the architecture of peace. The tone grows warmer, softer, a sense of awakening, but not yet triumph. This is the dream of control, not dominance, but balance, not the crushing of freedom, but its transformation into safety. Hobbes understood that the Leviathan would not live in one ruler, but in the shared imagination of society itself. It would exist wherever men agree to uphold order. It is the invisible body of cooperation, the silent law that keeps the streets safe at night, the reason a child can sleep without fear. In this sense, the Leviathan is not just a government. It is a state of mind, a collective conscience that whispers, peace is worth obedience. Life is worth restraint. The narrator's voice now slows into something almost hypnotic. Every law we follow, every rule we keep, is part of that living body, the Leviathan within us. We do not bow to it. We build it. We breathe it into existence. This is why Hobbes called it artificial. It is not born of nature, but of reason. It is humanity's greatest invention, the bridge between fear and order, instinct and understanding. Without it, civilization would dissolve back into the restless tide of self-preservation. He wrote, "By art is created that great Leviathan called a commonwealth, or state, which is but an artificial man. Though of greater stature and strength than the natural, for whose protection and defense it was intended. The narrator reflects on this quietly, letting the listener absorb the idea. Perhaps the Leviathan is not something outside us at all. Perhaps it begins inside, as the quiet voice that chooses understanding over impulse, harmony over chaos. The music swells softly, not dramatic, but wide and oceanic, like breathing in unison with something larger. This is the heart of Hobbes's philosophy, that the greatest power we can imagine is not divine intervention, but human cooperation. The Leviathan is the collective dream of control, the promise that through unity, even fear can be made useful. The narrator whispers, "We are the hands that built it. We are the breath that keeps it alive." The sound fades again into stillness, leaving only a low hum, the sound of thought continuing beneath silence. The chapter closes not in triumph, but in balance, preparing the listener for the next movement, the moment when this dream of control will take form, when imagination becomes structure and the abstract becomes real. The final lines come as softly as sleep. Reason imagined peace and called it Leviathan. It is not a king. It is not a monster. It is the mind, learning to govern itself. Silence follows the dream of power. The image of the Leviathan, vast, protective, imagined into being, still lingers in the mind. But now, that dream begins to take shape, not in one ruler or one law, but in something deeper, a shared understanding. For the first time, humanity begins to see itself not as 1,000 frightened bodies, but as one collective spirit awakening from fear. The narrator's voice comes softly, like a breath between thoughts. Perhaps peace requires surrender, not of the body, but of fear itself. It is here that Hobbes's great idea of the social contract begins, not yet written in law, but felt as an emotional turning point. Before there was order, there was longing. Before there was the state, there was trust, fragile, tentative, but real. Men who had once stood apart begin to move toward one another. They look at their neighbors and realize that everyone carries the same fear, the same exhaustion, the same wish for peace. The war of every man against every man cannot go on forever. Something must give, not their weapons, not their pride, but their fear. Hobbes wrote, "The passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them." This is where his philosophy becomes deeply human. Peace is not an ideal, it is a negotiation with fear. Each man, moved by reason and necessity, begins to make a quiet promise. If you let me live, I will let you live too. The narrator's tone grows warm, steady, and intimate, the kind of voice that makes even abstract ideas feel personal. This is not surrender. It is recognition, the realization that your safety depends on mine, and mine depends on yours. In that recognition, something extraordinary happens, a kind of collective awakening. For centuries, humanity had lived as scattered individuals, driven by instinct and isolation. But now, under the slow guidance of reason, they begin to feel the outline of a greater unity. It is as if the human race, long divided by fear, finally exhales together for the first time. The music swells softly beneath the words, low strings, slow tempo, carrying the sense of something vast and gentle unfolding. "We dream of kings not to rule us," the narrator repeats, "but to protect us from ourselves. And now we begin to see what that dream means. It is not about obedience, it is about agreement. The Leviathan was never meant to be a tyrant. It was meant to be the reflection of our collective promise, the embodiment of trust given form." Hobbes described it simply: "A commonwealth is instituted when men agree amongst themselves, everyone with everyone, that to whatsoever man or assembly of men shall be given by the major part the right to represent them all. Every one shall authorize all the actions and judgments of that man or assembly of men in the same manner as if they were his own." The narrator pauses, letting the listener absorb the weight of that thought. "To agree," he says gently, "is to give a part of yourself, not your freedom, but your fear. It's to build safety from within." And slowly, the image forms, a gathering of people beneath an open sky, hands trembling but reaching out. There is no king yet, no crown, no ceremony, only the quiet understanding that survival requires cooperation. Fear, once a wall, becomes a bridge. This is the emotional birth of the social contract. It begins not in words, but in silence, in the shared pulse of those who finally realize that peace cannot be kept alone. The narrator's tone grows softer, more meditative, guiding the listener like a voice inside a dream. Imagine the world holding its breath, 1,000 hearts deciding almost at once to trust. It is a fragile moment, but it is enough, because from this shared trust, everything else begins. Law, justice, order, community. The Leviathan becomes more than an idea. It becomes a covenant, a living agreement built from the logic of survival and the yearning of the soul. Hobbes knew that such trust could never be perfect. Suspicion would always linger. Fear would never fully vanish. But that was precisely why the Leviathan had to exist, not as perfection, but as protection. It was humanity's way of saying to itself, "We cannot live without power, but power must begin in agreement." He wrote, "By this institution of a commonwealth, every particular man is author of all the sovereign doth, and consequently he that complaineth of injury from his sovereign, complaineth of that whereof he himself is author." To modern ears, this sounds harsh, but to Hobbes, it was liberation. For the first time, power was not divine, it was human. It was not given by God, but created by consensus. The Leviathan was not born from fear of heaven, but from compassion for one another. The narrator's voice softens again, almost as if addressing the listener personally. "You and I, and everyone who has ever lived under law, we are part of this same ancient promise. The peace you sleep in tonight was built by countless hands that once trembled with fear. In that thought, something profound happens. Fear transforms once again. It becomes gratitude. The same emotion that made us hide now allows us to rest. The same instinct that made us fight now teaches us to care. The music grows lighter, as though the world itself has exhaled. This is the beginning of belonging," the narrator says. "The moment when humanity, for the first time, becomes we." And then comes the quiet reflection, the sound of peace not yet achieved, but already imagined. The Leviathan lives, faintly, in every heart that has chosen trust over terror. It is not a king's crown, but the simple, invisible bond between one person and another. The promise to protect what they fear most to lose. The final words arrive slowly, like dusk settling over the mind. Perhaps peace requires surrender, not of the body, but of fear itself. And in that surrender, humanity wakes together for the first time, not as enemies, but as one. The voice fades into the sound of slow breathing, as though the world itself is resting after its long unrest. And somewhere in that stillness, the Leviathan takes its first breath, not yet seen, but already alive. Night settles once more, but this time it feels different. The air no longer trembles with fear, nor hums with the restless motion of reason. It simply waits. The promise of agreement, that fragile awakening of trust, still hangs in the air like a breath held too long. Humanity has taken its first step toward unity. But before dawn, there is always stillness. The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper, calm and deliberate. They have dreamed of safety, imagined order, and reached out toward each other. But tonight, they are still afraid. It is not the old fear, not the primal terror of the state of nature. This is a quieter kind of fear, one born from awareness. To create peace, they must surrender something sacred, not just freedom, but the illusion of control. They stand on the edge of a decision that will change everything, to build something greater than themselves, something powerful enough to command their obedience, yet fragile enough to depend on their faith. The world holds its breath. Tomorrow, the voice continues softly. They will build a god. But tonight, they are still afraid. That is the moment before the storm, the pause between idea and action, between thought and creation. The Leviathan has not yet risen. It exists only in the mind, a dream made of fear, reason, and necessity. The people know they cannot survive without it, yet they hesitate. For in giving life to this power, they will also give it their will. Hobbes understood this hesitation deeply. He knew that every covenant, every social contract is an act of both faith and fear. Faith that others will keep their word. Fear of what happens if they don't. He wrote, "The mutual transferring of right is that which men call contract." Simple words. But behind them lies the greatest leap humanity has ever made, to trade instinct for structure, chaos for order. The narrator speaks softly, almost like a meditation. This is not the end of fear, but its transformation, from the trembling of survival to the quiet awe of creation. The tone slows even more, leaving long spaces between sentences, letting each word breathe. It feels less like explanation and more like listening, as though the world itself has fallen still, waiting for the birth of something inevitable. Hobbes described the Leviathan as an artificial soul, a man-made god designed not for worship, but for protection. Yet tonight, before it is built, humanity senses the weight of what it means to create such a being. They are not forming just a government, but the very idea of authority. For the first time, men will obey not out of instinct or fear of one another, but from a shared belief in the necessity of order. And so the silence deepens. The narrator's tone turns almost sacred, the kind of voice that blends philosophy and prayer. Every age has its night before creation, the quiet in which Imagination decides the shape of what will come. In this stillness, the listener can almost feel the pulse of human thought, slow, vast, collective. It is the same pulse that once moved through fear, that learned reason, that built trust. Now, it beats as one, carrying a single idea through the darkness. There must be something greater to keep us safe. The music underneath fades to near silence. A few low notes, like a heartbeat slowing. The atmosphere is weightless, suspended between endings and beginnings. For Hobbes, this is the most delicate moment of all. It is the point where philosophy turns into power, where words become will. He does not rush it. He lets it breathe. Because in this breath lies everything that makes us human. Our capacity to imagine peace, to build gods out of reason, and to fear the very things we create. The narrator pauses, then says softly, "Every civilization begins with this same silence, the moment before trust becomes law. The world is poised, trembling not with panic but with purpose. The fear that once divided now unites. It is no longer a cry, it is a whisper that says, we will build something greater, we will endure." And yet, even as this hope forms, a quiet unease remains. For the Leviathan, this protector they will create, will also hold immense power to make peace eternal. It must be strong enough to command, yet wise enough not to destroy. Humanity can sense the paradox, but cannot escape it. To live in order, they must first build something that can never truly be tamed. The narrator's voice becomes tender, reflective. This is the silence before the storm, not of violence, but of creation. The calm before reason takes form. The scene unfolds slowly, the sky pale with first light, the minds of men heavy with the knowledge of what must come next. Each person carries both hope and hesitation, knowing that tomorrow they will give life to something powerful, and in doing so, lose a part of themselves. Hobbes's words echo faintly through the silence. By art is created that great Leviathan called a commonwealth, for whose protection and defense it was intended. They will build it not out of faith in perfection, but out of fear of destruction. They will shape it not as a dream of power, but as a defense against the nightmares of the past. The narrator lowers his voice to a whisper now, as if speaking from within the listener's own thoughts. Do not mistake this stillness for peace. It is the weight of what comes next. The moment before humanity creates its greatest invention, authority. The music rises barely above silence, one note, drawn out, dissolving like fog over still water. And then comes the closing reflection, calm, slow, like the last breath before sleep. Tomorrow, they will build a god, not of heaven, but of their own reason. And though they will call it peace, it will carry within it every shadow of their fear. The narrator pauses, then adds one final thought, almost inaudible. Tonight, they rest. Tomorrow, they begin again. The sound fades completely now. No music, no voice, only the soft hum of quiet, the kind of silence that is not empty, but full of potential. The listener feels calm, yet curious. The mind rests, yet wonders what will come next. And in that quiet curiosity, Hobbes's vision lingers, a world standing on the threshold of its own creation. The screen fades to black. Dawn rises slowly over the silence left by the night. No thunder, no storm, only the faint hum of light returning. Humanity, exhausted by its long dream of fear and reason, wakes to something fragile yet new. The Leviathan has not yet been born, but the world has already changed. People now understand that their fear is not an enemy. It is the beginning of understanding itself. The narrator's voice is calm, rhythmic, like the steady sound of breathing. Breathe. In this breath lives the story of all humankind. It is an invitation, not just to reflect, but to feel, to trace the arc of everything that has unfolded, from chaos to order, from darkness to thought, from isolation to unity. Hobbes' philosophy, when stripped of its iron and law, is not about control. It is about the simple truth that all order begins with the breath of fear, the instinct to survive, and that reason is how we learn to breathe through it. In this reflection, the tone is soft, almost weightless. Each sentence drifts like light on water. Fear was the first motion, the narrator says. It taught us to move, to hide, to protect. But reason taught us to look back, to see what we were running from. This is where the mirror of fear appears, not a mirror that distorts, but one that reveals. Hobbes believed that to understand human nature, we must look directly into our own reflection, unguarded and honest. He wrote in Leviathan, "For by art is created that great Leviathan called a commonwealth or state, which is but an artificial man. The artificial man begins with a real one, with you, with me, with the pulse of fear that makes us human." The narrator continues, his voice deep and even. "In every age, fear has been our teacher. It built our shelters, guided our prayers, and shaped our dreams. We have run from it, fought it, named it evil, but we have also grown because of it. The sound of soft ambient tones, like the rhythm of distant waves, fills the silence between words. The listener is gently drawn inward, toward stillness. Look into that mirror," the voice invites. "You will not see a monster. You will see motion, the same motion that makes your heart beat, that carries your breath, that turns thought into language. To fear is to live." In Hobbes' world, this was the foundation of all philosophy, not to deny fear, but to understand it. "Fear and I were born twins," he once said. It was not despair. It was a confession. He had learned that every search for peace begins with the acceptance of fear's presence. To know peace, you must first know the noise that peace quiets. The narrator lingers on the thought. We do not escape fear. We transform it. We give it meaning. We let it speak, and through reason, we learn to listen. This gentle rhythm becomes a kind of meditation. The listener no longer feels the need to analyze, only to breathe. As the reflection deepens, the world of Hobbes transforms from a place of war and division into something intimate, human, almost tender. His harsh descriptions, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, were never meant to condemn humanity, but to awaken it, to remind us that without structure, without trust, life collapses inward. But with understanding, even fear can become a foundation for something sacred. Every philosophy, the narrator whispers, is a mirror turned toward fear. And yet, in Hobbes' mirror, fear does not destroy. It reveals the shape of the human soul. It shows us the frailty of life, the hunger for connection, and the strange beauty of vulnerability. He understood that fear is not only what divides us, it is also what unites us. Every person who has ever lived has known its pulse. It is the common rhythm of existence, the breath we all share. The narrator breathes audibly, inviting the listener to follow. Inhale, feel the motion of life. Exhale, let the world settle into stillness. For a moment, the entire journey of the Leviathan condenses into this one act of breathing, the movement between chaos and calm. Hobbes's materialism, so often misunderstood as cold or mechanical, becomes something luminous here. To him, thought itself was motion, emotion was vibration, life was the ceaseless circulation of energy. The human being, far from being divine, was still wondrous, a living machine capable of reflection, capable of peace. In this light, fear is not a flaw. It is the first engine of wisdom. Without fear, the voice murmurs, there would be no reason to build, no will to think, no need to seek peace. The tone grows gentler still, almost imperceptible, as if dissolving into sleep. So breathe, and remember that fear is not the enemy of calm. It is the breath that precedes it. The narrator pauses, letting silence return. The world feels slower now, safer. The listener can feel how the story has circled back to its beginning, only to reveal that the beginning was never chaos, but the possibility of order. In this stillness, Hobbes's philosophy feels less like theory and more like meditation, the movement of the human mind from confusion to clarity. Fear was the first motion, reason the second. Together, they compose the eternal rhythm of becoming. The narrator closes softly. We began in fear. We learned to breathe through reason. And now, in the quiet between chaos and order, we see ourselves whole, fragile, awake. The music fades into a single, lingering note, like the last light before dusk. The listener is left not with anxiety, but with calm. The awareness that fear is no longer something to escape, but something to understand. It is the mirror that reflects everything that makes us human. And as the breath deepens, the story of the first journey, the first step toward the Leviathan, draws to a gentle close. Breathe, the narrator whispers once more, barely audible now. In this breath lives the story of all humankind. Silence rests gently upon reflection. The mirror of fear has shown its truth, that every act of reason, every breath of peace is born from what once terrified us. Humanity has seen its reflection clearly now. Fear is not an enemy to destroy, but a teacher to understand. The narrator's voice comes softly, steady as a slow tide. Fear is not darkness. It is the candle that burns before dawn. Those words are the essence of Thomas Hobbes. Beneath his arguments about laws, power, and the Leviathan, there is this quiet realization that fear, rightly understood, is wisdom in its earliest form. It awakens reason, sharpens attention, and leads the mind to seek peace. Without it, there would be no need for thought, no search for safety, no birth of order. The voice continues, slow and meditative. Think of fear not as a storm to hide from, but as the sound of the ocean before calm. It is the first movement of awareness, the moment life learns to protect itself. In Hobbes's time, this truth was radical. Others believed fear corrupted the soul, that courage required its absence. But Hobbes saw the opposite. He believed that fear, especially the fear of death, was what made humans capable of civilization. It was the force that pushed men to reason, to create rules, to build trust. He wrote, "The passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them." Here, in his calm logic, is something deeply compassionate. Hobbes did not see fear as weakness. He saw it as a natural guide, the most honest part of human experience. To be afraid is simply to know that life matters. The narrator pauses, allowing silence to stretch, as if to let that thought breathe. Fear reminds us that we wish to live, and to live well. The music behind the voice is almost imperceptible now. Low strings, a faint pulse, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The listener is drawn inward, not to analysis, but to calm reflection. Acceptance, the narrator continues, is the gentle law. It is not written in books or carved in stone, but in the quiet understanding that to be human is to be vulnerable, and that is not something to resist. Hobbes's philosophy, at its deepest level, is not a command to dominate, but a call to accept, to see that we are not gods, not spirits beyond the reach of nature, but living beings bound by motion, need, and desire. He once wrote, "The life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." But even in those harsh words lies compassion, the recognition that our shared fragility is what drives us to build societies, laws, and peace. The narrator's tone warms, deepens. To accept fear is to begin to understand yourself. To understand yourself is to begin to forgive the world. It is a truth that feels both ancient and immediate. Each listener, lying in quiet, can feel it, that fear does not vanish by force, but by acknowledgement. In the same way we accept the rhythm of breath, we can accept the rhythm of fear, rising, falling, never meant to be conquered, only observed. The voice softens to a near whisper. Fear has always been our first teacher. It shows us the edge between life and loss. It whispers of what is fragile, and in doing so, it teaches us what to cherish. In Hobbes's logic, this understanding became the foundation for morality itself. He did not appeal to divine law or eternal virtue, but to the human instinct for preservation and peace. To him, reason was not a gift from heaven, but a refinement of fear, a way for humans to transform panic into prudence, violence into cooperation. He wrote, "Reason suggesteth convenient articles of peace, upon which men may be drawn to agreement." That is what the gentle law truly is, not the command of rulers, but the whisper of nature urging calm. The narrator lets the idea unfold gently. This is not the law that punishes, but a law that understands, the law that lives inside you. It does not shout, it does not threaten. It simply says, be still. Protect what is good. Do no harm if peace is possible. As the listener absorbs this, the words seem to dissolve into quiet realization. The gentle law, the voice continues, is not about control. It is about balance, the harmony between fear and wisdom, between the instinct to survive and the will to live well. The tone shifts to something even softer, like a lullaby made of thought. In every breath, fear still exists, but you no longer need to resist it. It is no longer your enemy. It is your guide. It has done its work. It has brought you here, to the edge of understanding. This is where Hobbes' philosophy becomes more than theory. It becomes a meditation on human nature itself. The Leviathan, the laws, the social contract, all are external reflections of this same inner truth, that peace begins with acceptance, not denial. Hobbes' reason, so often mistaken for cynicism, was really an act of mercy. He did not condemn humanity for being afraid. He built a philosophy that allowed fear to find rest. Fear is not darkness. The narrator repeats softly. It is the candle that burns before dawn. And like that candle, fear's purpose is not to last forever, but to lead us toward light, to the understanding that peace is not given by power, but created by awareness. In the stillness, the narrator speaks one final time, the words almost floating in air. Acceptance does not mean surrender. It means to live without resistance to what is. It means to let fear complete its circle, to let it teach, and then let it go. The music swells, barely, as if the listener is being wrapped in warmth. Every note feels like exhalation, a release of tension that had been carried through the entire journey. Fear has fulfilled its purpose. It has guided, protected, enlightened, and now it can rest. The voice closes gently, as if speaking from a distance or from within the listener's own mind. Let fear rest now. Let reason breathe. Let the gentle law guide you home. The breath slows. The light fades. The first hints of dawn are near. And in that in-between, that quiet moment where fear dissolves into peace, Hobbes' philosophy finds its true form. Not as a warning, but as a whisper of understanding. Softness fills the air, not silence, but the quiet hum that comes after understanding. Fear has spoken, reason has listened, and now both rest together, like waves returning to shore. Humanity has faced its reflection, accepted its trembling, and found wisdom in surrender. What remains is not chaos, not conflict, but calm, the gentle rhythm of a world breathing in order. The narrator's voice lowers, tender and unhurried, carrying the listener deeper into rest. Now let your thoughts drift, as Hobbes once drifted through his fears. The words hang for a moment, then dissolve into stillness. The music fades to a soft pulse, slow, like the beat of a heart half asleep. It feels less like sound and more like breath itself. In this final movement, the journey of the Leviathan becomes something intimate and inward. It is no longer about kings or contracts, laws or power. It is about the simple miracle of peace found through understanding. Hobbes' universe, once harsh and mechanical, reveals its hidden gentleness. Beneath logic, there was always compassion. A man who knew fear and yet found serenity within reason. He once wrote, "The condition of man is a condition of war of everyone against everyone." Yet even as he described that darkness, he was reaching toward light, not to destroy fear, but to give it form, to turn it into law, into safety, into harmony. The narrator speaks softly, almost like a lullaby made of thought. The universe hums with order, and you, too, are part of its gentle law. The sound widens, airy and infinite, as if the listener could feel space itself breathing. A vast, unseen rhythm connecting everything. The tone is no longer instructional or philosophical. It is maternal, almost sacred. Hobbes's reason has become something human again, a comfort, not a command. Fear, which once seemed to divide man from peace, now unites him with the world. The storm that raged through the state of nature has calmed into quiet understanding. Every thought, every law, every act of cooperation, all of it, Hobbes would say, is born from the same motion, the desire for peace. The narrator breathes out slowly, voice softer now. Let go of the noise. Let go of the struggle to make sense. You have already understood more than you know. There is a pause, not empty, but full of stillness. The kind of stillness that allows rest. This, Hobbes might say, is the truest peace, the moment when fear no longer rules reason, but reason no longer needs to fight fear. Both become quiet, balanced, as natural as the rise and fall of breath. Covenants without the sword are but words. Hobbes wrote, but here, in this stillness, words themselves become enough. There is no sword, no law, no threat, only understanding. Peace exists not because of power, but because of recognition. Each listener, lying quietly now, becomes part of the great balance Hobbes imagined, the living proof that order can exist even within fragility. The narrator's voice melts into the rhythm of the music. Reason has carried you here. Now, let it rest. Let thought become still, and let stillness become sleep. The transition from thought to silence is seamless. One long exhale that carries the listener gently downward. The words no longer instruct or persuade. They simply allow. Good night, the narrator whispers. Child of reason. The phrase is tender, timeless, as though Hobbes himself was speaking not as a philosopher, but as a father to humanity, calming it after centuries of fear. The storm has passed for now. The line lingers, neither a promise nor a warning, but a reminder of impermanence. There'll be storms again, within and without. But for this night, there is peace. For this breath, there is balance. The music expands, slow chords, distant, weightless. It sounds like the movement of time itself, steady and endless. The mind drifts, the body loosens, and the last remnants of thought dissolve into quiet awareness. Somewhere within that stillness, Hobbes's philosophy completes its circle. What began as fear, the cry of a world in chaos, ends as peace, the hum of a mind that understands. Reason whispers softly, not to calm you, but to keep you awake. Yet now, even reason may rest. The narrator's voice fades to a whisper. Sleep not as one escaping the world, but as one who has understood it. You have seen the storm. You have walked through the noise. And now, you can rest within order. The breath of the world, the breath of the listener, and the breath of Hobbes's thought merge. One rhythm, steady and infinite. The final words drift in like the tide. You are not separate from the universe. You are part of its design. The laws that guide the stars also guide your peace. The music fades into a single tone, low, warm, eternal. Then silence. No ending, only rest. The screen darkens, leaving only the soft echo of Hobbes's eternal truth, that fear, reason, and peace are not enemies, but stages of the same breath. And just before sleep takes hold, the last whisper returns. Good night, child of reason. The storm has passed for now.